Welcome to the Beyond Atheism podcast, with me, Nathan Alexander, and my co-host, Todd Tavares. Moving beyond questions of God's existence, this podcast asks, what's next in a world without God? If you're enjoying the show so far, make sure to like and subscribe, rate and review, and consider supporting us on Patreon.
The New Atheist movement, for better or worse, raised the profile of atheists and non-religious people in the early 2000s and 2010s. One of the movement's loudest voices was Christopher Hitchens. Famous and infamous in equal measure, Hitch was perhaps the wittiest and most vibrant of the atheist four horsemen until his passing in 2011. To talk about Hitchens and the politics of the atheist movement, we're joined by Dr. Ben Burgis, who is a philosophy instructor at Rutgers University, as well as a speaker and writer. He serves as the host of the YouTube show Give Them an Argument and writes for Jacobin magazine. He's the author of a number of books, including Canceling Comedians While the World Burns, a critique of the contemporary left, and most recently, Christopher Hitchens, What He Got Right, How He Went Wrong, and Why He Still Matters. Ben, welcome to Beyond Atheism.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks again, Ben, for taking the time to talk with us. So just to get started on your book, so it's approaching the 10th anniversary of Hitchens' death. And as you note in the book, a lot of younger people might not have any memory of him now, aside from maybe like short clips on YouTube and things like this. So maybe just could you give us sort of briefly, like who was Hitchens and why is he an important person for atheists and also people on the left more generally?
Yeah, right. So part of why he's interesting to me, and I wanted to write this book, is that he's somebody whose body of work spans a lot of the things that I'm interested in. Since, I'm whatever else I am, I'm certainly a huge philosophy nerd, and so arguments about whether there's a God or whether if there's not, if that means that we can't make sense of morality, the kinds of things that he spent so much the last 10 years of his life arguing about are really interesting to me. But also, I'm a leftist, and he was unambiguously for the first 30 years of his career, and it's more complicated after that. But I think the maybe the most important reason why he's interested is that he's somebody who was, if nothing else, a incredibly good writer and a really and like probably one of the best debaters that I can think of. You could see evidence of that still all over YouTube. And so if you're interested in that cluster of subjects, he's somebody whose work I think you could profit from engaging with. So on the leftist side, over the course of the 90s and going into 2001, he wrote this series of books attacking first Mother Teresa, and then Bill and Hillary Clinton, and then Henry Kissinger. And for my money, I mean, all three of those definitely landed on their targets. And I think that's just a really valuable, I mean, that's a small slice of his overall body of writing from 1971 to 2001, but I think it's a representative slice of some of what makes it so valuable. And so I think from a leftist perspective, there's this whole body of work, from 1971, which is the very first book with his name on the cover. It was actually a collection of essays by Marx and Engels about the Paris Commune that he wrote an introduction to 2001, which is when Letters to a Young Contrarian comes out, which is the book where he kind of officially gives up on the socialist politics that defined a lot of his life up until then. He had some, he was pretty ambivalent about it, right? Like it wasn't like, oh, I was so wrong, but it was like, I think the world has changed and this probably isn't on the agenda anymore. But between that, between those two dates, that 30-year period, I think that there's a tremendous amount of work that a lot of young leftists today, people who kind of became political maybe as a result of the first Bernie Sanders campaign in 2016, might really I think is worth rehabilitating and kind of taking a look at. And one of the goals of the book is to try to introduce that audience to that body of work. But certainly from an atheist perspective, the other half of your question, this is really the main thing that he devoted that last decade of his life to. And there too, I think there's some really interesting work. I mean, it's I've got my criticisms, I talk about in the book. Maybe we could talk about it a
Mhm.
little bit here, but I
Mhm.
also think that he got some very important things right. And when he was right, he certainly said it better than anybody else could have.
Yeah. I guess this is more on a personal level. What was the first experience that you had with Christopher Hitchens, and like what was it that really connected you to his work, or what was there a particular insight? Was it just the style? What pulled you into that world?
Yeah, so I think there are actually two phases here because I was a weird enough kid that as a teenager I was reading The Nation when he was publishing in there regularly.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
uh, and I yeah. So whatever's wrong with me, for that to be the case was wrong with me then. Uh,
Right.
and he had this regular column in there. He and Alexander Coburn both did, and sometimes those kind of felt like dueling columns every other issue. And even at the time, even though some of the stuff they disagreed with him about, I agreed with Coburn. Like I thought, yeah, man, this guy is like one of the best writers in on the left. But then, he then to a great extent, he kind of followed off my radar, and he wasn't somebody that I was necessarily following in any great depth until the late
Mhm.
2000s, kind of at the tail end of the new atheist era. And there I could much more clearly identify, what kind of got me back into it, which is a debate in 2008. I mean, I wasn't, I saw it on YouTube, but,
Yeah.
Mhm.
uh,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, but a 2008 debate with his brother, Peter Hitchens, who I actually was lucky enough to interview about a week ago, and he's an interesting guy. I mean, he's very like he's a very gracious person and sort of thoughtful and interested, but also in some ways he's a complete lunatic. Like he like in Christopher's memoir Hitch 22, he's got this line where he's talking about Peter's book, The Broken Compass, and he says it contains what is it, claims and assertions so reactionary that I felt the need to wear a garlic necklace just to read them.
Right.
Um, but in this debate with Peter Hitchens, the part of it that I remember originally watching is Christopher's opening statement, from Grand Rapids in 2008, actually not too far from where I went to college, but that was, I'd long since graduated by then. And the opening statement is kind of, if you like this sort of thing, I mean, it's kind of the pinnacle of the forum. Christopher gets up there and he starts out like, well, I don't think I'm going to need 10 minutes to disprove the
Right.
existence of God, and then really what he's doing is actually what I think he was, I mean, that's a, obviously a very funny opening line, and like the way that the statement is structured is really like it's a very nicely put together thing. And but the real core of it isn't actually about the existence of God issue. The real core of it is what I think Hitchens was best at in this whole era, which is this kind of humanistic moral critique of of Christianity and similar religions. So I like one of the most memorable lines from that, and I think I like at that point, right, as a about a 30-year-old graduate student when I saw this on YouTube a year or two after it came out. Like at that point, it was like if you like there was definitely a couple weeks there where if you like got drunk or high with me, like I'd probably make you watch that video, because I really enjoyed that. And his most memorable line from it is this extended analogy between the sort of small o Orthodox Christian conception of God and the government of North Korea that ends with, but at least, but like it's actually more tyrannical because at least you can fucking die and leave North Korea.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
that's one of the things I remember both in his speech and in his writing is that there's a humor to it. There's a
Mhm.
liveliness. It's funny and engaging, and The other thing about him was he was just so highly literate. This is
Mm-hmm.
definitely true in God is Not Great, when
Mm-hmm.
like he's just like you can tell that he really dug into all of the belief systems. He really loved digging into the theology as much as he loved just making a naughty joke, like the
Mm-hmm.
Mother Teresa book, which has the title of The Missionary Position,
Yes.
Yes.
which is perfect. But speaking about debates, I think
Yeah, yeah.
Nathan had a question about this.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to ask more generally, like just about what the value is in these debates. Like if you see kind of value, I think that's one of the big sort of legacies of the new atheist movement. I think that, and maybe Hitchens in particular, that there is like a big thing about YouTube debates and like videos titled like so and so destroys
Yeah,
so and so.
yeah, yeah.
And I think that's sort of a legacy of the new atheist era. And actually, I was someone like who was actually Christian, and I was watching a debate with Richard Dawkins and some Christian guy, and I actually found like that sort of started me on the path of skepticism to some extent, because I found the Christian arguments very like pretty lacking. But anyway, yeah, I just but I also wonder, like, is it this sort of intellectual combat, sort of where one side must destroy the other? Like, yeah, what do you think about this sort of legacy of these debates? And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a little ambivalent about it. I think that what you're identifying there is basically the house style of YouTube debates in general, where and especially clips from YouTube
Hmm.
debates,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's the sort of all caps destroys thing, which
Right.
always makes me roll my eyes. Although since you sort of have to be if you want to produce content on YouTube,
Yeah.
Mm.
Hmm.
even if you're not quite of that world, you have to be in it. So I always like to say that our at Give Them an Argument, our YouTube manager Kelly, part of what I pay her for is to write titles for clips that would make me cringe if I had to write them myself. So
Yeah. Right.
but
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, I think it's good. I think there are good things about it and bad things about it. I think the bad thing about it is that, especially the sort of combination of new atheism and everything that's good and bad about that, and just YouTube, right, as a medium, did really do a lot to solidify this idea that the point of a debate is to like rhetorically crush somebody's skull, which I think is not the most useful way to I mean, as somebody who does these a lot, right, I don't think it's the most useful way to think of things. I mean, I try to, like, and if anything, I mean, I think that even if I'm debating somebody I regard as a deeply terrible person, which I've definitely done
Hmm.
a few of,
Hmm. Hmm.
I, the goal is to, well, I mean, the goal is to reach out to, like, in that era, right? That, like,
Yeah. Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Mm.
to have somebody who is on the other side, maybe, or ambivalent, or maybe was solidly on the other side, but for whatever reason they're at a point in their lives when they're open to a different perspective, and try to reach them. And I think probably the thing that's most effective in there is to be, like, extremely polite and friendly with the person, but
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
but try to, like, make arguments that will get inside the heads of the people I just described, and kind of work on them over time. That said, if I want to actually watch a debate and I know that there's a Hitchens one on that subject, like, that'll be the first one I go to, because it's going to be
Mm-hmm.
so much
Mm.
damn fun to watch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it has atheism come up much in the debates that you've done yourself?
Just a little bit. So I did one that was kind of entirely about that in a way. And actually, the one that I just did, we were talking about a little bit before we started recording, it came up. It came up just a little bit, since Charlie Kirk, who is, whatever, everybody knows who Charlie Kirk is. We don't have to do that.
Yeah, we should maybe just say he's the founder of this conservative group called Turning Points USA.
And I heard he was recently destroyed in a debate.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So when I was arguing, debating Charlie Kirk, the by 95% of it was political, but there was the way it was structured. There was the first hour was also released as an episode of this new show that he's doing, Debate Night with Charlie Kirk, and then the second hour was like kind of a bonus thing. So in the bonus hour, we did get into some more philosophical topics, and because Charlie is very fond of saying, like when I was kind of prepping for this debate, like I watched several of his old debates, as you would, and I've seen him say several times, whenever like the person he's arguing with about politics uses the phrase social contract, he'll say, "Oh, there is no social contract. I didn't sign a social contract. Rights come from God." And I've seen him say that enough times that, like, when we were kind of wandering into more philosophical territory anyway, I just like picked a little bit of a fight about that because, like, I that just drives me crazy because I think it's sort of, my view is that it's sort of a nonsensical thing to say, that if you say our rights come from God, well, one thing that could mean is that and then it clearly doesn't mean, right, is that God is like intervening in the world to make sure that we have these political rights, because check it out, right? But then the other thing that it could mean, which he did, I think, agree, it was a little unclear, but I think he agreed that this is what he meant, is that it's morally wrong, it's it's morally unjust for a society to deny people these rights because God wants us to have them, which of course raises this obvious question about if God, does God have a reason for wanting us to have these rights? If so, tell me about that reason. And, presumably whatever that reason is going to be just as available to an atheist or an
Yeah.
agnostic.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or if God doesn't have a reason, it's just like that's where the explanation bottoms out, that this is what God wants. Then, okay, so we just kind of like got lucky there that he wants, free speech and freedom of religion and equality
Right.
for women. And, he could just as easily have wanted us to have fascism, and you haven't told me anything
Right.
about
Right.
why not. So that came up a little bit there. But the other one that was entirely about it was actually very very, very Hitchens relevant, because it's kind of one that happened because I was researching for this book, right? I was trying to go through and reread as much as was humanly possible of Hitchens' writing, which is extends, like, if you've read all the books, that's like kind of a beginning, right? Because
Yeah.
Yeah.
he spent decades writing for the New Statesman, and then the Nation, and Vanity Fair, and Slate, etc. Right? Like the man wrote all the time. Like this was kind of his. This is the defense when people would be like, man, guy seems to drink a lot of whiskey. Like, you sure you don't have a problem? And he'd be like, I do 2,000 words of usable print a day.
Right. Right.
So I was trying to reread as much as I could, at least realistically, of his writing. So one of the things that I read was this little book of battling back and forth essays that he wrote with Pastor Douglas Wilson, called "Is Christianity Good for the World?" And when I was reading that book, Wilson's half of it, like I kept. I mean, I was reading it on Kindle, but like I kept kind of wanting to throw my Kindle at the wall because it was driving me crazy. That like it seemed to me that he was conflating these just completely different issues about like what makes something morally wrong, and then why, that, like, in other words, what your moral reasons are for not doing something, and then whether you have a self-interested reason for not doing it. You're worried about going to hell, right? And so, which it just seems to me that's like, okay, I mean, if I lived in Stalin's Russia, I would have a self-interested reason to do what Stalin wanted, but that's not a moral reason. That's like,
Right. Yeah.
in normal context, we understand how these can come apart. So I did a debate with Wilson on is atheism immoral, and so I sort of did the thing that I always do when this comes up, of trying to separate out the issues a little bit, because I think there's a tension between a couple different things. One of which is that, as I said, I mean, whatever else I am, I'm a huge philosophy nerd, and I obviously enjoy arguing about, stuff like, does God exist? What's the foundation of morality? But also, I'm a, like most of what I do, most of what I spend my time writing, thinking, and arguing about is about politics. And look, I'm not under any illusions whatsoever that somebody who might be an atheist and like a right wing libertarian is more my paisan than Cornel West is. And, and so I and the way that I always kind of soften that when this comes up in debates is I'll kind of say, look, if you don't want to impose your religion on me, then politically we're 5 by 5. I have tremendous respect for Christian socialists like Cornel West or Martin Luther King, or just to pick a third example of a progressive Christian at random, my wife Jennifer. So I'll kind of do that, but then like I guess the last thing I'd say about this is just that I do kind of go back and forth about how to think about this, because on the one hand, my usual line on this is, look, I enjoy arguing about philosophy. I think that it's like a valuable human pursuit in its own right. I'm happy to agree to disagree with while we work on paying people a living wage and giving everybody health care and all that. But ultimately, sure, I mean, I'm also happy, you get back for the march, let's have a fun argument about philosophy. And that's largely my attitude towards it. But the one thing that is a little bit complicated about it is that I do think that when the Douglas Wilsons of the world say that if you don't believe, what they believe, like you can't be a good person, like that actually does seem like something that it might be legitimately publicly important to push back against.
Yeah. But this I think brings kind of touches onto Hitchens' position of
Mm-hmm.
anti-theism,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which, I mean, you've set the stage for your atheism, which even in the book you differentiate between his anti-theism. Could you tell us a bit more of like how he viewed this, what his view of atheism was, how it became this anti-theism, and why is that such a bad thing?
Yeah. So I think that one thing that would be one of my criticisms of the new atheist movement, as it existed in the late 2000s, a sort of weird thing has happened since then, where it's still like it still exists, kind of, right, but it's certainly a shadow of what it was then, and a lot of people who were kind of adherents of it have drifted off in various other directions, right? Like Sam Harris is went from being one of the four horsemen of new atheism to being kind of, he's sort of disowned it now, but kind of a charter member of something called the intellectual dark web, along with people like Jordan Peterson, who's sort of a strange mystic, and Ben Shapiro, who's like a religious fundamentalist who thinks that there should be a Palestinian state because God gave the land of Israel to the Jewish people. So something weird has gone on there, right? But I think that if you think about the sort of new atheist moment, roughly from whatever year maybe that the Dawkins book came out, the God Delusion, for like a few years after that, there's the sort of years when Hitchens was really kind of at his height of emphasizing this issue. One thing that I am, critical about that movement is that it really contributed to what I think is maybe an important confusion between these two concepts, because atheism, at least as I understand it, there are different people who define these terms in different ways, and I don't get too excited about fighting about words, right? I can just kind of be like, okay, look, we could do like atheism and atheism star, right? Like however you want
Yeah.
to.
Mhm.
Uh, but at least the sort of definitions that make sense to me would be to say that atheism, and I know a lot of atheists disagree with me about this, but atheism isn't just the absence of a belief in God. That seems a little bit wrong because I don't think that like my miniature Schnauzer Lucy is an atheist. Um,
Mm.
but
Mm.
and it does seem to me that even with humans that there's a difference between an atheist and an agnostic, and maybe there's even a difference between an agnostic and somebody who's just like, I don't know, lived their entire life in a cave and they've just never heard the suggestion that there's a God, right? So the definitions that make sense to me are to say that, an agnostic is somebody who reserves judgment about whether or not there's a God, who's sort of like made a conscious decision to say, I'm neutral about that. I'm not sure, and then an atheist is somebody who holds the position that there aren't any gods. So that's what makes sense to me, at least. But I think that one thing that the new atheist movement did a lot to sort of muddy the waters on is the difference between holding the metaphysical position that there aren't any gods, that would be atheism, and having this kind of moral crusade against religion, that would be anti-theism. And to the extent, there is some ambiguity here because, like, just focusing on Hitchens, which obviously is the one I'm most familiar with, because I mean, probably even before, but certainly because I spent the last year writing this book, but also because I think he did a lot to contribute to what I'm talking about here. That Hitchens sometimes talks in a way such that his only real beef with religion, like the only sort of sense in which he feels any sort of moral compulsion, is what I just said, right? That he doesn't want people to impose religion on him, or he doesn't want people sort of impugning the morality of atheists. And to the extent that's all he was saying, I agree. But it seems to me that there are a lot of places where he goes further than that, and he seems to be suggesting that it's actually this morally and politically urgent thing to convince people to be atheists, to have uh, and it seems to be very tied up with this a certain analysis of why a lot of the bad things in the world happen, right? I mean, the subtitle of God is Not Great is how religion poisons everything. Uh, and a lot of the thesis of that book, which is a book I love in many ways, but a lot of the thesis of the book that I find the most dubious is that all of the sort of terrible things in history that happen kind of under the banner of religious belief were that like the sort of central cause of that is religious belief. And I think it's a complicated argument. I don't want to give it short shrift, but I think that there's an important sense in which I don't really buy that.
Mm. Yeah, and in the book you get into how, I mean, it's people should read it. I think it's an excellent discussion how it moves away from a materialistic description of the world and seems to be one that's powered by idealism or ideas.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, but because with atheists, one of the weird things with atheism, as you
Yeah,
point out, like if your dog is an atheist, there's
right.
no way to draw a positive philosophical position out of this nothingness, right? Like if you don't believe in UFOs, it doesn't give you a political philosophy. If you don't believe in ghosts, it doesn't give you a political philosophy. And it doesn't, Hitchens, there seems to be some connective tissue.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find like atheism informed your view of socialism in the same way?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. Let's think about that. So maybe I think that the connection between the two, as like certainly like Marx would have drawn it, and also as Hitchens during the decades that he was a socialist would have drawn it, and maybe even after, because he always even in the last phase of his life, when he was taking some political positions that I think are like really bad and indefensible, he still maintained some kind of ambivalence and residual affection for and a sort of defense of certain things about the socialist tradition. Um, but um, but is it what that connection is supposed to be in like Marx and the introduction to the critique of the philosophy of right, or Hitchens in, like, if you read like a essay that he wrote in the 80s called "The Lord and the Intellectuals," or another one called "The Politics of God's Funeral," the connection is supposed to be roughly that the purpose of religion is to get people to accept their lot in life, and not try to improve it. Which I think there's definitely some truth to historically, that it often has played that function. Uh, I mean, I don't think there's any denying that. That, like if you look, like, what were the teachings of the medieval church, right? What for that matter were the teachings of like German Lutherans, like during the Industrial Revolution, preaching, to workers about what they should do. I mean, that's, and by the way, let's be consistent about this. This also doesn't even apply just to religions like Christianity. I mean, like, I've always thought, there's this Zen story about this guy who was a bodhisattva, had achieved enlightenment, and is asked, "What did you do before you achieved enlightenment?" He said, "Well, I carried water from the river." And I said, "Oh, what did you do after you achieved enlightenment?" "Well, I carried water from the river." And that's supposed to be sort of deep and beautiful and profound, but all I could think when I hear it is, man, that seems like the effect of that is to get him to accept a situation that's not great, right? I mean, like, I kind of would prefer him to get mad about it, and start a water carriers union, and, like, get paid more, and have more free time, so maybe he can go back to college, and like, that's sort of, what would seem like a more useful message to me. So I think that it's undeniable that that religion in many times and places has in fact filled that function. But the thing that complicates it for me is that it's also true that that there is a long tradition, definitely not the dominant tradition, but one that exists, of religious people finding support within religious traditions for the kind of values that I would like. That we could talk about the civil rights movement. We could talk about the social gospel, etc. Right. So, I think that some of the moves the Hitchens would make to sort of say why this doesn't count just aren't entirely convincing to me. And I think that what I find really insightful here is, if you read Michael Brooks's book Against the Web, in the last chapter of that, he's kind of got this view that's sort of derived in part from Amartya Sen, and kind of through Sen, you can kind of trace back John Rawls, which is that there is no such, like, when people ask these questions, like, is Islam in its, like, real true essence this nice positive religion of peace, or is Islam in its real true essence this nasty fundamentalist religion that teaches the oppression of women and religious minorities? And I think the right answer to that question is that it's just, the question is flawed. The question is based on a flawed premise, that there is no such thing as the real true essence of Islam. Like, in fact, like, we can even sharpen this if we assume atheism, because we say, okay, I understand what a believer means when he says such and such is the, like, one true interpretation of Islam, but I don't understand what a non-believer means when they say that, right? This, like, they clearly don't mean this is the version that God intends. So failing that, what are we talking about? And what I would say is that, like, cultural traditions in general and religious traditions fall into this, are vast and multiform things, where you'll find people within those broad cultural religious traditions who find their way to exactly the kinds of values that I like and would agree with, and then find things in their tradition to use to sort of express them in the language of that tradition. And there are people, of course, in all those traditions who find their way to values that I loathe, and find ways to express those. And I think that where I would, and so I think that there are people who, there are Christian socialists, there are there are people who have done things that are really politically who for whom it's tied to religion, and conversely, there are atheists, and this is one of the things I think we learned from that experience of sort of vintage new atheism. There are people who, when we're talking about that, right? We're enjoying that line about dying and leaving North Korea together, but then like they are also neoconservatives who want to spread like secular liberalism to Iran by means of the 82nd Airborne, or they're also libertarians whose idea of a good society is one where people would be like selling their organs for Bitcoin to make rent, and I don't,
Yeah.
I don't have any
Yeah.
I don't have any truck with that, right? So I think that there are. I think there could be a connection, because I think that belief in an afterlife in particular could lead people to be complacent about conditions that they shouldn't really be accepting. But I don't think it's a necessary connection. I think that we can kind of look at the evidence and see that different people have drawn different conclusions.
Yeah. Just like there happen to be anti-theists who advocate for imperial wars in Iraq.
Mhm.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But I don't think that necessarily reflects on anti-theism. Like, I think that there are people who, like, getting back to Hitchens. I mean, like, when people on the left sometimes, like, they'll one of the many unconvincing explanations they'll come up with for why he did start to take those positions in the last years of his life, is that, well, it was like the anti-theism kind of led him to intense Islamophobia, which is what led him to support those wars. And I really don't buy that, because one, if you look at his overall career, the anti-theism was there for like decades before he
Yeah.
before he started. I mean, I just talked to his brother, and he told me that this is probably the most consistent position, throughout Christopher's life, that he probably held it from about the age of 11. So I don't think that's it, right? And also, like, I think it's also like, look, why not, if you're an anti-theist, right? In other words, if you hold the view that it's really morally or politically important to sort of try to get people to not be religious, and you really see religion per se as the cause of a lot of the bad and dangerous things that happen in the world, that position, okay, I can kind of see how you can get from there to support for the invasion of Afghanistan, as tragically misguided as I find that. But I don't really see how you get from there to supporting the invasion of Iraq, because, like, Saddam Hussein's government, as awful as it was pretty secular, and the invasion was ordered by this like evangelical fundamentalist who wore his religion on his sleeve. And if you actually can remember back to that period, plenty of people who completely agreed with Hitchens on the anti-theism, like, had an instinctive aversion to this kind of attempt by this very Jesus-y president to remake the world in America's image.
Mm.
Um, yeah, Ben, I wanted to talk about cancel culture a little bit, just sort of to pivot away
Sure.
from
Yeah, yeah.
Hitchens. So you've also written a book, another book that came out pretty recently on cancel culture. Um, Maybe just could you just give us sort of an elevator pitch for like why you think cancel culture is a real thing, and what, and like why is it a problem?
Sure. So I think that people who say that this is nonsense, there's no such thing, what are you talking about? Uh, I will grant you that those people, I think, have a lot more evidence on their side in the last year, really, than they had before it, because in the last year, mainstream conservative politics, Republicans have like really latched onto that term, and they've used it in many nonsensical and inconsistent ways. The Mr. Potato Head thing is cancel
Right,
culture.
right, yes.
Yeah.
Like it's just bizarre. So I think they've clearly overextended to the term, to the point where if somebody was just paying attention to their usage of it, they said, "Oh, that's meaningless." I'd kind of say, "Okay, fair enough," right? Like, let's just come up with a new word for what I want to talk about. But what I want to talk about which is, I think, the dominant sort of 2019 and earlier sense of what people talked about cancel culture, or even before the term cancel culture was popularized, what people meant when they used like the sort of 2017 kind of term, which was call out culture. I think that what they're talking about is this atmosphere that, we can talk about all the things that cause it, but just to bracket that for a second, this kind of atmosphere of mutual surveillance and hair trigger denunciation that I think, especially insofar as it leads to calls for people to be, fired or deplatformed, is, I think that's what people are really talking about, right? Now, I would have a very different analysis than a lot of the people who most like to talk about it, of where it comes from and what could, potentially be done to mitigate it. Because I think that, a lot of the people who most like the term, their analysis of where it comes from is that it's like, I don't know, whatever Jordan Peterson always says, postmodern
Yeah,
neo-Marxism,
right.
you know, by which he really means like postmodernism and Marxism and blue-haired college kids who annoy him. Uh, and I think those are all three different things,
Yeah.
and I really don't think any of the three have much of anything to do with this phenomenon. I think that the phenomenon is caused by broader cultural and technological trends. Most obviously, the rise of social media, which makes it very easy to keep track of people's statements, and and sort of dredge them up when you get mad at them, and and for people to start like these kind of avalanches of denunciation. So most obviously that, but I also think there are broader things that, like the fact that we do live in this kind of neoliberal hellscape where most people have increasingly, right, many, increasing chunk of the population live these incredibly precarious lives. Most Americans work in non-unionized workplaces where they could be fired at any time, and so that really lends itself to like, that really gives the threat of doxing and all that an extra sting. And also the fact that that kind of neoliberal hellscape is such that people are incredibly atomized, that that some people often feel the strongest connection to other people online. And then also we could talk about the profit incentives built into the social media companies themselves, who have every incentive to, and this is, have more or less admitted to, try to make their product as addictive as at all possible. And I think that the effect of that all kind of coalesces to get this phenomenon that people are talking about when they're talking about cancel culture. And I guess I just briefly recommend, if you want a bunch of vivid stories that illustrate what I'm talking about, there's a book from 2015 by John Ronson called "So You're Being Publicly Shamed," that I think is kind of the best thing on that. Especially, I like the fact that none of his, almost none of his examples, I guess one or two are, but almost none of his examples are about like rich and famous people, particularly, right? They're about people who, for the most part, we've, like Justine Sacco, for example, or Lindsay Stone, who we've only heard of because they were canceled, and that really, I think, gets to one of the reasons, I think, when people say, "Oh, this is just like rich people who are, who don't, or powerful people who don't like being criticized," I'd say, well, one, I'm actually much less concerned about them than I am, because if a really famous person is really canceled, then they're probably going to be fine. Because if anything, the sort of boomerang effect from people getting mad at the injustice of what they've done to them is such that they'll land on their feet, right? Like they'll probably, like they might even be better off, right? Because of it in the long run. Whereas if you're just some like person who writes for a local newspaper, and somebody decided to dredge up your bad tweets from 10 years ago, and get mad at you for it, then probably it's going to be it's going to be very effective. And I'd also say that one reason I really wish that the left would sort of switch from just kind of tailing along with the standard liberal position on this, which is kind of gaslighting people about whether it exists, uh, you know, is that I think if we kind of tried to take ownership of this a little bit more, I think that we have plausible things to say about maybe not complete solutions, because not all problems that are big problems have clean, easy solutions, unfortunately, but things that are at least substantive, partial solutions, like most obviously changing labor laws to make it easier to organize unions and harder to fire people.
Yeah, because that's like when we talk about cancel culture, if you, especially to bring up that example of the small town newspaper writer,
Yeah.
like the canceling, who's actually doing the canceling in that case? It's, I mean, bosses should be taking the most responsibility for this, the ownership, shouldn't they?
Well,
If
sure.
they're
No, yeah. Look, no question. I think that one thing that might be a useful comparison is thinking about McCarthyism in the 50s. I guess from the late 40s to kind of early 60s, roughly, is what we're talking about. We're talking about McCarthyism, and so you have two things, right? You have this kind of red hunting hysteria that's stoked by lots of people who aren't actually in a position to fire anybody, and then you have the Hollywood studios, for example, giving into that. And if you want to say ultimately that second part is the more important part, then I don't disagree, right? But I mean, I also think that there is a sort of shift where these things arise in the first place with greater frequency than they used to, and whatever your explanation is of that shift, I think it's worth acknowledging, right? Like, so just a small example, right? There was God, when was this? This was like a few months ago. It was like spring. There was a contestant on Jeopardy who he'd done this like he'd just won like 3 games in a row or something, and every time he won one, he'd do this thing where he'd like hold up one of his fingers for I won one, and then like and then like it got to 2 or 3, and there were people who were convinced that he was like sort of slyly doing the like okay sign, which people who have like terminally online brain poisoning think is a white supremacist thing.
yeah,
uh, and there were like 400 former Jeopardy winners who signed this open letter saying that like kind of denouncing him for this and saying that Jeopardy should should have like edited it out or something like that. And I think that whatever else you think, right, whether you think it's a big deal or you don't think it's a big deal, whatever you think caused it, whatever you think might help mitigate it, I think we've just got to acknowledge that not only would that not have happened in the 90s, I don't think that would have happened in 2011.
mm,
Yeah,
yeah,
right. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. There's a lot that's changed in there. And how was that one resolved? Did he continue to play?
I think he did, although I believe, I mean, I think he also kind of did this groveling apology for that, and also I mean, to be fair, the other half of it was that there was a question where he'd said like this was actually like a correct answer to the question, but he used the word gypsy, and people object to that
Oh,
because
okay.
because you're
No.
supposed to say Roma now. Although I will also note that it's a little bit ambiguous because, like, at least in the UK, advocacy groups actually use the acronym
Oh, okay.
GRT for Gypsy Roma Travelers, so it's like a little bit
Yeah.
in flux whether this is, whether this
Right.
is an acceptable term or
Yeah.
not right now. I actually remember, if you watch the TV show Dairy Girls, there's a joke about that in there, but I think that it's very unlikely that there was any kind of malicious intention there.
Yeah.
I will also say though that, like, we've been talking about cases where it's just like straightforwardly unjust, like, that people just have some crazy complaint about somebody. But I think even in more ambiguous cases where somebody legitimately did something wrong, I think it is a little bit disturbing that increasingly there's a certain aspect of the culture where there doesn't really seem to be a mechanism for forgiveness, and and second chances and all of that stuff, and it's, I mean, it's complicated, but I do see that as a problem in its own right.
Yeah. Yeah. You know what? This is a very rich untapped vein. Ben, we'll have to have you come back for this
Yeah,
because I
happy
think we
to.
could go another hour. But now it's going to be time for Can a True Atheist?
Sure.
Which, Nathan, it's been so long. How did we describe this game?
Well, it's sort of a tongue-in-cheek game asking questions about whether a true atheist can do a certain thing. Can a true atheist, for example, say, "Oh my God," or will they get sort of their atheist card revoked?
Yeah.
Um,
There's no wrong answers,
no
but
wrong answers, and
you
I
might
like
most
get
it.
canceled.
yeah, yeah. So anyway, there's a couple of questions we'll ask. So Ben, can a true atheist say "bless you" when someone sneezes?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
That was easy. Yeah. All right, Dr. Ben Burgis.
Yes.
Can a true atheist be afraid of death?
Ooh. Uh. Yeah.
Okay. That makes sense.
All right. Okay. This one sort of relates back to the politics thing. Um, can a true atheist give their unqualified support to capitalism?
uh. Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, I think that's
Hmm.
compatible.
Okay.
Oh man, this just got dark. Can a true atheist use goods and services provided by religious organizations?
Yeah, I mean that seems fine to me. I mean, like, I guess unless maybe the exception is that if it was, if the goods and services were manufactured by, like, what do they call it, like the Project Rehabilitation Force at the Church of Scientology, that,
Oh
like,
yeah.
if it's something like that, right, that
Yeah.
somebody is somebody has actually, like, been enslaved by a religious organization,
Mm,
then you might, it's not that it's incompatible, not that doing a bad thing is incompatible with sincerely having a certain metaphysical belief, but, like, you kind of question if part of what we're packing into true atheist is, like, you have some sort of you know value system consistent with, a kind of robust secularism that might just, put that in question.
mhm.
Yes. Can a true atheist believe in objective moral values?
Definitely.
All
Okay.
right.
All right. Okay.
This is easy. Wait a minute. Are
Yeah,
there
maybe we could.
objective
Yeah.
moral values?
Ooh,
Aren't they
big.
just handed down from God?
Yeah, I mean, I think I mean, my big, I will just shamelessly plug and say that the second chapter of the book is largely about this exact question, but since my position is very strongly that the two questions are unrelated to each other, God or no God, and objective morality or objective or no objective morality, then yes, for sure they can definitely do that.
Yeah. All right. Next question. Can a true atheist consume animal products?
Yes, I think so, and this is actually also relevant there because I don't know if you want to get on a whole thing about this actually, or if I should just say yes, we should move
Huh.
on.
Well,
You can
maybe.
flesh it out.
Yeah. Just yeah.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
okay, just a tad, right? We'll the so one of the very few previous books written about Christopher Hitchens was this book, the Faith of Christopher Hitchens by Larry Taunton, and in that book, Taunton is an evangelical who Hitchens debated, but also they became friends. But then Taunton wrote this book about him after he died, and in which he suggested that actually, Hitchens' atheist worldview was coming apart, and he was like, and he was, teetering on the edge of giving it up entirely, and who knows what might have happened on his deathbed, uh, and
Hmm.
uh, and so it's a, the whole thing is in very bad taste, but the reason I was thinking about it is one of his pieces of evidence is that he wasn't really a that that he wasn't really holding strong to his atheist worldview is that he told him he disagreed with Peter Singer about there being nothing special about humans, but
Okay.
that just seems like a
Yes,
kind of a
that's
separate question.
that's definitely that's a stretch. Uh, can a true atheist meditate?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you, yeah, sure. I mean that, I think that, I mean, I think if you're, I mean, if it's like bound up with sort of details of Buddhist or Hindu religious practice, then like depending on what we're packing into atheist, maybe not. But like if it's, I mean, but yeah, I mean that like if you like sitting in a certain way and counting your breaths and trying to I mean, all of that stuff might actually be a good thing to do, and there's certainly nothing about it that has to be attached to a certain metaphysical belief.
Yeah. And finally, can a
Yes.
true atheist dislike Christopher Hitchens?
Yes, for sure.
Okay.
I mean, I'm a, I'm obviously somebody who likes him a great deal, despite a lot, right? I mean, I think that there's a case for. I mean, it's not like I don't get what the case for not liking him looks like, but, So, but I still like him a lot despite all of that. But yeah, I mean, you could be. I mean, presumably there are numerous former comrades of his who had who just completely reviled him after his sort of reaction to 9/11 and his support for the wars and all that stuff, who were just as atheist as he was. I mean, I think if I think being an atheist and liking some of the stuff about religion might make you a little bit less likely to dislike Christopher Hitchens, but it's definitely compatible.
Yeah. Well, it's a hell of a read. Very insightful. It's a great mix of philosophy, socialism, his story, and how he ends up taking that bizarre turn at the end. It illuminated a lot. I highly recommend people checking it out. Yeah, Ben, is it out yet?
It is not out yet. It is available for pre-order. It officially comes out on New Year's Eve. So if so you can't you can't wrap it up and put it under the tree for your whiskey swilling atheist uncle, but you could pre-order it and print out your receipt and use it as a stocking stuffer, and then when it actually shows up on New Year's Eve, you can take a look at the nice cover art that Andy drew, and then go out and celebrate New Year's Eve, and then when you're and then when you're like kind of sluggish and hungover the next day, you can give it a read.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Ben, anything else you want to plug aside from your book?
No. I think that's good. So yeah, I think you mentioned GTA and Jackman and all that at the beginning. I don't know. Watch the Charlie Kirk debate. It's fun.
Right. Yes. All right.
Definitely.
All right. Yeah. Thanks again for coming on, Ben.
Yeah. Thank you. Good for having me.
Well, that was fantastic. That was Dr. Ben Burgis. Nathan, what's your takeaway from Ben Burgis?
Yeah, many things, I guess. Just to sort of pick up on the cancel culture thing we were talking about at the end. But I appreciate like his perspective of sort of acknowledging like this is like a real phenomenon. It is harmful, but at the same time not kind of remaining like on the left about it and not kind of descending into like right-wing lunacy or whatever, like sort of exaggerating like how widespread this is and so on, and so I think that was valuable.
Yeah, he had a lot of nuance to it, and a lot of the pieces connecting technology to attitudes to working conditions and how all these things factor into it. So it's not just, and that there's multiple layers. Man, wow, it came on fast and furious, like most of what he does. What was your takeaway from the Hitchens book and his discussion of it?
I think the really useful thing, I mean, in addition to being a good like overview of Hitchens' career and stuff, it's also just a good introduction in general to many other topics. Like one thing I learned more about is sort of the difference between Trotskyites,
Yeah.
Hitchens sort of claimed to be, and like Stalinists,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
which this division goes back to the start of sort of the Soviet Union. And yeah, I think, and like, and other things like he said in our conversation about like religion and morality and stuff. And there's a part about like
Oh
reparations,
yeah. Yeah.
just many, and like, you know, like the Clintons, like, because obviously
Yeah.
Hitchens wrote about that. So like it's about many of the topics like Hitchens touches on, but then like you actually get a sort of introduction to all these different topics as well,
Yeah. And
which is
we, I
really
mean,
useful.
even in the discussion, we barely touched on Hitchens' atheism, which is, I mean, it's
Yeah.
intense and it's long and it's throughout his at least 40 years, is the way Ben put it. Like
Hmm.
that's the most consistent thing throughout his
Yeah.
life and his working
Yeah.
career, and it's astounding.
Hmm.
Yeah, like you, I mean that the connection he makes between that atheism or the anti-theism and Hitch's Christopher Hitchens left wing particular brand of left wing politics of international socialism, defining what it is and how he got there and how it relates to the principles he draws from atheism is is fascinating, and it goes into much greater detail and much better explanation than we could get to anything we could get to here.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. And it also explains one of the best slanders or slurs against Hitchens there ever was, from George Galloway, who called him a drink sodden Trotskyite popinjay. I think that's
Yes.
what it was,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is just brilliant. And it goes into discussion even about that. So it's yeah, there's the book is very very rich, gives a great connection to Hitchens' politics, and an explainer about what they are and how they relate to the time and to contemporary politics, what they mean to
Yeah.
him. And you
Yeah.
know, the
Definitely.
thing about the book is that it's just it being about Hitchens. It's a lively read that puts you back kind of in. It was great to like read about Hitchens again. You forget how fun he is, like just how great he was, not just in those debates, in his writing, how much he enjoyed sort of like the adversarial combat of the debate, how much he loved sparring intellectually on the page.
Yeah, you definitely got a sense that like it was like it really like enjoyable for him to kind of be engaged in this like intellectual combat sort of, and like, I mean, he always, and like, yeah, he wrote and like spoke with just like a humor. I mean, like, I guess we were saying like in the discussion so on, like a humor, and just like a sort of joy of life and stuff that
Right.
that makes it kind of fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
Which definitely stands out if you compare him to the bulk of the new atheists at that time. It's very
Yeah.
dour, very self-serious,
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
pedantic almost.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, I guess like the other main sort of four horsemen, Daniel Dennett, Sam Harris, and Richard Dawkins, like they all are more kind of, especially Dennett and Dawkins, more in the academic world. Whereas I guess obviously Hitchens really was more of a journalist and you know, writer and so on. So yeah, I mean, I guess, yeah, yeah. That, I think that kind of impacted like the way he was maybe used to putting arguments and so on.
Yeah. Which is that reminds me of another point. It's definitely like a through line in the book and through Hitchens' life is like not just that he's contrarian, it's that he does it to make a point.
Yeah.
And I
Yes.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
it's usually very effective. And if I'm not mistaken, I think he aided the Devil's Advocate
Hmm.
during
Hmm.
Mother Teresa's canonization. So when someone has to become a saint, or so when someone gets to become a saint, or they're trying to make someone a saint, the church has a department that argues against their sainthood. So basically, a trial. And his book was used. if I understand it correctly, was used as evidence against her canonization. Which is, I mean, that's awesome. That's really super cool. It had a point, and of course, he was correct. Let's not leave that to
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, like that. I mean, he's someone who really lived with this idea that sacred cows make the best hamburger.
Yeah. 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 But I think the important thing was, like you said, like it wasn't contrarianism for its own sake, which I think you see like more and more these days. But like there was always like a point and a principle to it. I think that does like keep it kind of rooted into something, and it's not just, yeah, you're not just flailing around at whatever thing you kind of see. Like there's always a point to it.
So Hitchens, he's worth checking out. He's still, I mean, his books are still in print. They're still available. You can see him on the YouTube. Ben Burgis, fantastic conversationalist. You can check him out on YouTube at Give Them an Argument. He publishes through I think Jacobin. He's still writing there, and he has a couple books. We've got the links down below. One is Canceling Comedians While the World Burns, Critique of the Contemporary Left. And for pre-order right now, not available to purchase yet, is Christopher Hitchens, What He Got Right, How He Went Wrong, and Why He Still Matters. Other thanks, Nathan?
Yeah, we would like to thank the audience
Of
for
course!
listening.
Oh, man, I
Yeah.
forgot again.
Uh,
Yeah, of course.
yeah. Yeah. um, and Red Japan.
Oh, my
We would like to
goodness.
thank who supplies our theme music.
Fantastic.
Yes.
Excellent as always. Note for
Mhm.
note, pitch perfect every week. Um, and what else? Oh, ring the bell, pull the string, kick the dog if you have to, like and subscribe. Check us out on Patreon, and we'll see you guys later.